So today I saw an interesting discussion between a high school coach and an individual trainer about the value or the merit of individual training. So essentially it started with a high school coach essentially writing an article and saying, if you're going to use a trainer, watch out for these various things because you don't really need to do them if you're going to, pay somebody. The things that you can either do on your own or the things that have no transfer to the game, and so they're superfluous and you don't need to be doing them essentially. Things that potentially, if they're fun and you want to do them on your own, great, but not something that you should be paying somebody to have you do. The trainer then responded and kind of defended the profession of individual training. And one of his arguments was that if a student struggles in class, that student sees a tutor, and so because in a tutoring situation you have a one-to-one relationship, it's a better educational experience than being in a classroom with 20 or 30 other students. Now, I have several problems with that analogy. One, I don't think you can transfer what is academic knowledge or the acquisition of school-based metrics with sports. I think the learning is different. In sports, you're learning a motor skill. In academics, it's purely cognitive. And so I don't think that you can make a one-to-one relationship between those two. Second, if school was all about a one-to-one teacher-student ratio, then obviously we're doing something wrong because that's not how schools are, and that's never how schools have been. So either every society has developed inappropriately, or there's more to learning than simply being in an isolated one-to-one relationship. Third, the idea that you need a one-to-one relationship, whether in basketball or in class, is based on this idea that you need more feedback, and more feedback is better. And that's not always the case. Oftentimes, less feedback is better. Oftentimes, allowing the student to decide when he or she needs feedback is better, whether that's in the classroom or whether that's in a basketball setting. So the tendency in working with an individual trainer on the court is that coach is always going to be giving constant, immediate feedback, because if that coach or trainer is silent during a workout, then you have to question, what's that coach doing? The player is just shooting around and the coach just stands there and doesn't say anything. Even though that might be entirely appropriate based on what that coach has seen. But the perception is that you're there to give feedback, and therefore the more feedback you give, the better. And that tends to be how trainers are judged. I know that I had people criticize sessions that I ran because they said I didn't give enough feedback, because I didn't say stuff after every single repetition. And to me, no player enjoys having every single repetition critiqued. And so, again, I think that's one of the differences between, an academic environment and a sports environment, is the necessity of the feedback and the importance of delayed feedback and allowing players some room for trial and error and things of this nature. Finally, when I was getting my doctorate, I was in a statistics class, had never taken statistics before. There were a couple things that I didn't understand, couldn't clarify through the book, so I found Khan Academy online, YouTube, and I used that kind of as my tutor. And so I had a specific question, went to Khan Academy, got a specific answer. Done. No longer did I use that tutor. Okay, it was, I watched a 5-10 minute video, got the answer I needed, and then I was done. I did not continue to use that tutor on a week-by-week basis, and I certainly did not continue to use that same tutor for a different class. It was a specific question, specific answer, done. And that's kind of, more typical of a tutoring situation. You have a problem with a specific lesson or maybe a specific class, you go to a tutor, you get help with that area where maybe you're slightly deficient, you catch up, you understand it, and now you can move on and you reintegrate into your classroom experience. In an individual trainer situation in basketball, it tends to be more, I found a trainer And now I'm going to work out with them every week on every skill, regardless of whether or not I have a problem with that. And it just becomes, a workout guy. So, a long time ago, I had like a 12-year-old or 11 or 12-year-old parents, mother brought this player to me. And she said, my son is a really good player, but he can't make a free throw. We've been to 3 or 4 shooting coaches. Nobody can solve his problem. Can you work with them and help him with his free throws? I said, sure. I watched him take 2 shots. The problem became instantly clear. They just didn't know how to bend, and so he was off balance as he was shooting. Showed him a couple things, how to bend properly, how to sit back into a shot, different things. Problem solved. Okay, so truthfully, that probably should have been the end of our relationship. Parent brings child to a shooting coach, has a specific problem with the shot. Problem is fixed. Problem solved. Move on, go back to your team, continue playing, maybe check back, every couple weeks to make sure things are moving in the right direction. Instead, what happened is I became a workout guy. Parents said, oh, wow, you're so smart, you fixed a problem that nobody else could fix. I want my son to spend more time with you, so we're going to pay you to practice with them every single week. And so it essentially just became a workout. They came, we did some dribbling, we did some shooting, blah, blah, blah. Basic individual training. And essentially I was a workout guy. And the reason why the mom was willing to pay for this was, 1, they could afford it. 2, it's a time and an era of childhood where, he wouldn't just walk to the park and shoot on his own. That wasn't something that, people in his neighborhood or in his environment were frequently doing. So instead of encouraging, her son to, hey, just, go down to the park and shoot, or I'll drive you to the park and, you can shoot for an hour, it was, okay, we're going to drive way out of our way so that you can have a 1-hour appointment with a coach and do essentially all the same things that you could have done at the park down the street by yourself, but now you're going to be inside and you're going to have somebody watching you. And that's really the only reason for that continued relationship. Again, in essence, if we're equating it to tutoring, it would have been, okay, problem solved, back to your class, we're good. All right, but that's not what happens in individual training. And so continuing to use this idea of, oh, well, students have tutors, so basketball players need individual trainers. Yes, player may need a shooting coach. Player may have a problem with their shot. That player comes to a shooting coach, maybe in 1, 2, maybe it takes 5 or 10 sessions to correct whatever that problem is. And then that should be the end of it. The problem is solved. Now you go back to your team. And again, maybe every once in a while you check back to make sure that, the change is taking permanence or you're not regressing, so on and so forth. But instead, in basketball, we have this idea where, once you've trained with somebody, you need to continue training with them over and over and over and over again. And individual trainers will fuel this because that's how they make money, by telling players, well, yeah, you'll improve more if you come back next week, and you'll improve more if you come back next week. Even though it may have been because they were trying to solve one specific problem, not just generally improve, however you want to judge, or define improvement. So again, we cannot equate an academic situation with a sports setting. We can't equate the learning that takes place in a classroom with the learning that takes place on a basketball court. They're different. And similarly, if we want to use the example of a tutor and equate it with an individual trainer in sports, well, just as you go to a trainer to learn one specific thing and then you can move on, if you have an issue and you need more instruction outside of your team setting, go find a shooting coach, that can help with that problem. And once that problem's fixed, then return to your team and you don't really need that. Instead, we end up with these workout guys and this whole industry of people who are practicing skills outside of the context of games because they can make money doing it, because parents believe in its efficacy, and because children don't go out to the park and play and practice on their own. And so the answer isn't that these children need these trainers. Instead, we probably need to encourage them just to play and practice on their own. And if they're not motivated enough to play and practice on their own, they're probably never going to be good enough to really need to see a personal trainer, because they simply like playing when they play, and if they're not playing, then it's okay for them too. So they don't have that drive for greatness or anything that would necessitate paying somebody to help them reach that higher level, which typically is part of a parent's motivation for hiring a private trainer, is to get them to that next level. So the motivation from the player needs to come first, and they need to have a specific reason for that, using that shooting coach or personal trainer or individual coach. But typically, the individual training takes place outside of the context of what's going to happen in a game. And so more of the practice time should be spent within contextual environments, whether that's playing pickup games, team practices, team games, open gyms, or potentially large group training, because this is where you can have a greater effect. And we can't lose sight of what happens in a game just because we think that automatic immediate feedback is better, or because a child uses a tutor in a classroom, and so, or because everybody else uses a workout guide, so I need to use a workout guide, or whatever the other reasons that we have for choosing to go to these trainers. Again, it's not that individual trainers are doing anything wrong or bad. It's just that in a lot of cases they become a crutch instead of actually something that's useful or necessary for that player.